we have then resorted to having this only one that is in Cape Town. Secondly, because we have introduced that software system that allows people to capture the guests, it eliminated basically the need of having another accreditation station in Johannesburg. So that system also seems to work very well. We have included all of these, the station of accreditation, the search park, all of those are now going to be in more or less the same vicinity, meaning it's going to be in the same walking distance around that. So we are not going to be having guests who are moving from one area into another area, and therefore basically creating heightened levels of irritation. The accreditation center that we have now is 49 Hope Street, and the entrance for that is in Clean Street. The search park also is in the same vicinity. We have arranged the park and ride in order to make sure that our guests are able to move from one point to another with relative ease, and also to come through to Parliament with ease in that regard. So basically the entirety of the event, of that process actually, is happening in close proximity. We have also working with the Department of Public Works, who, as you know, are responsible for maintaining the buildings of the state, and Parliament is one such area where they have that particular responsibility as the owners of the property. So they have also engaged in improving the vicinity. You would have seen, I think, people moving around, making whatever improvement and updates in that regard, which includes also, amongst other issues, looking at whether the equipment that we have works very well in terms of your access. You may have seen that in terms of the access points, there's some equipment that they have put in there. It means that whatever equipment, when they did the assessment, they would have found that that equipment is not working very well, and therefore they've put new equipment in that regard. So DPW is working with us in that regard, and SAPS, who have the responsibility for making sure that they manage access on behalf of Parliament. That process also is working very well in terms of our preparations. So we're on track in that regard, meaning the staff, in terms of equipment that would have been broken, that stuff will be fixed. And stuff that is not working, that is equipment that is not working, then we'll get new equipment in that regard. And in instances where we're not going to be able to find new equipment, then we have asked that colleagues and subs then borrow us some of the equipment so that we can then be in a position to have fully functional equipment across the institution. So in terms of our plans and our preparation, we are quite comfortable that it's all systems go at that level. There won't be any glitches in that regard. You also know that in this event, the South African National Defence Force get to partake in terms of the ceremonial activities, and you have the South African Police Service that also partakes in this regard. They have done their own preparations in terms of making sure that they prepare accordingly for the drills that have to be done and all the other ceremonial bits. We are on course in terms of our plans with them, and we will in later on be in a position also to do rehearsals in that regard. So the work that we are doing with the SAPS and the South African National Defence Force is underway and is basically is on track. We are also working, as I've indicated, with the provincial government and the City of Cape Town, the provincial government in terms of its own responsibilities for what it can do for us, and the City of Cape Town that are also responsible for quite a number of issues, electricity, basically making sure that they help us with the traffic, and also helping us to deal with our inclement plan of makes if the weather does change, to help us to deal with those matters. Also, the City of Cape Town are responsible, as you would know, for approving any matches that would be happening on the day. So there's coordination between the City of Cape Town and the relevant stakeholders that they need to coordinate with. So that the planning that needs to happen is planning that makes sure that we have a very good event, both in Parliament and outside of Parliament. So from a planning perspective and planning stage in that regard, it's all systems go. Just to go back a little bit on, you know that in this particular event, we have a rotational system for the imbongi, right, on the day. And in this instance, the imbongi will come from the language of isiSwati, you know, that will then render that particular function for the day. We are also pleased to note that, I mean, for this day, for this particular SONA, we have received an unprecedented number of interest from members of the media, both locally and internationally. I mean, the figures basically have gone up to 70 media houses, which I think in the past, if I'm correct, we were right in the region of about 40s. So now we have basically quite a number of media houses that will be present. In fact, we were at 47 to be a little bit more precise in the past. Now we are sitting at about 70, which includes both your local and your international media, which is a significant increase. And some of the media, I mean, they come from all over, and you see an increase also that comes from the BRICS countries. In that regard, we will be accrediting about 730 journalists on the day. So basically, the activities will be open and we'll be able then to share those particular activities of the day with the nation. We'll be able to share them with the continent and the world over for them to witness our kind of democracy and to be witnessing what will be happening on the day. In terms of the costs for the event, you would recall that last year we had planned this event to cost us as Parliament within the region of 4.5 million. This year, we have, consistent with the approach that we have tried as Parliament, we have made sure that the planning in terms of the budget that we have is about 4 million, right? We have 4 million for the entire event, meaning basically we are trying as much as possible consistently to improve on the way in which we are doing business. We're trying also consistently to make sure that we don't deny members and South Africans of any service that they need to get, but when they do get that service, it should be at a reduced cost, as it were. You would also be asking, I think, what has been our expenditure over the years. I think last year we spent, if I am correct, just above 2 million in terms of actual expenditure. And the previous year, it was 3 million that we had spent. And you would note that our budget for SONA really comes from quite a high, and I think we are now at quite a low. I don't think going into the future you can experience serious cuts in the budget, as it were, because I think we have reached a particular point now where the inefficiencies that may have been there in the system have been weeded out. And secondly, we have tried to use various forms and means of basically making sure that we're efficient in the manner in which we are delivering the service to members who are the guests in this regard, and the President and the South Africans at large. We will also, members of the media and colleagues, basically be embarking on a public education exercise, noting that this particular event is very important to South Africans, and South Africans are looking forward to the President and the government basically indicating what it will do for them and how it will address their issues and their concerns that they have. So part and parcel of that, in order to empower the public out there, we are running a parallel program of public education that would enable various sectors of society to have a better understanding of engaging and dealing with the State of the Nation's address. You know, after that, you have the debates that will follow through, and then thereafter, you will then have the budget speech, which basically will be the rands and cents that will be speaking to the policy that the President and the rest of Parliament will be debating and agreeing on. So we are running that parallel program of public education, and we'll be engaging with yourselves and colleagues in the media in order to make sure that we reach as wide a number of people as possible. In this regard, we are working with the GCIS, who are our partners, as you would know, as you have worked with them yourself. They also have access to quite a number of spectrum of media in this regard. We'll be engaging in the radio stations, community radio stations, your print media, your television, as it were, in order to make sure that the word goes out as wide as possible, and people are then ready to deal with this issue. Of course, there will be another question I think that you will ask, which we also then need to say, is that on the day, as we have established also last year, the people that will be here on that particular day, we have requested the departments, we have requested political parties, and we have also indicated to staff in Parliament that the people who will be here are those that will be having activities on the day. So meaning that staff that will not be, support staff that will not be engaged directly in one form or the other in the project will basically do their work from home, those who are able to do so. Those whose jobs, of course, requires them to be here so that they can perform their task. It basically means that it will be a day off, as it were. But what we are emphasizing on our side is that work must be able to continue for those that are able to do so, because all staff have, in fact, most staff that require the tools of trade have the tools of trade. And for those staff members whose tools of trade basically means that you have to be here physically. If you don't have anything that you would have been deployed to on that day, we have requested then that staff basically stay at home on those days. So basically what you'll then be having with that scenario is that everyone that will be here will have the appropriate tags. It means that it will be easier to usher people around, because what we have found in the past is that when guests are here, you know, sometimes they get lost because the pressings are huge, the building is huge, and sometimes difficult for people who may not be working here on a daily basis or visiting this place on a daily basis. So in order to make sure that we are able then to usher them properly, we'll then be having everyone with the tags clearly identified, as is commonly the case in any other event of this particular nature that will be held not only in South Africa but throughout the world. You will then have a closed way of gathering, and we have a way that would help you manage the situation, and a way that would help make sure that the guests are as comfortable as possible and are able to be guided in a much easier manner. I have also my colleagues and the rest of the team here that is working on SONA. So if I have left any other issue, I think they will add in that regard. But at this point, I think I would like to stop here, and we will then get, if there are any questions from members of the media that require further clarification, that require response, and that require to be attended to, we will do so, with ease with all the colleagues that are here. And of course, if there are any questions, hopefully that we, that we can answer, and I hope we don't have that situation. We will follow up and make sure that you have the information that you require as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, STP. And I've just noticed that almost all microphones lights are on. We're getting to question time. May we then request us to take perhaps one round of questions, maybe 4 or 5 questions, and allow the leadership to answer. I think the tradition is old. You will introduce yourself and your media institution first. Thanks.
It's Gay Davis from Eyewitness News. I wonder if you could just give us some details about the more extensive security preparations that are underway, because I understand that the red zone outside is going to be much bigger and much wider. And can you guarantee freedom of movement of journalists within the precinct on the day, particularly people who need to move from one part of the precinct to the other while the guests and everybody are arriving and moving in, and after the proceedings have begun, and whether one can leave the media bay in the gallery and go outside, and whether the freedom of movement will be completely unrestricted or not. And if you could just spell out the additional security measures that you're taking this year and the rationale for them. And also if you could confirm, Mr. Secretary, whether there are state security agency operatives here in Parliament now and over preceding days, and on what basis they are here and what they're doing. Thanks.
So we got 3 questions, literally. Okay.
Hi, Secretary. Janet Hurd from Media 24. Gay has partially asked the questions I was going to, but I think we need very specific clarity on the SSA, obviously before, but also in terms of vetting of guests and staff on that day. If you could elaborate on that, give us the detail. And also bearing in light of some of the recent incidents over previous years at SONA, with we can't forget the signal jamming incident, just to clarify that the freedom of access in the media gallery. So for instance, if there's a disturbance, that we will have freedom to move around and actually access where the news story is. We need to be able to get up and go where we need to go. And also I've got a query about in terms of the footage. If there is a disturbance, that the TV cameras will remain on, because there was a court ruling about this. Thank you.
Thanks, Janet.
Paul Herman from News 24. I'd just like to ask, I'm not sure if it was covered, what the security processes will be outside Parliament, in and around the surrounding roads. and if it will be any different to previous years. Thank you.
I think shouldn't we take a... All right. Noted.
Denise Williams from The Citizen. You mentioned, you mentioned about 730 media. Can you tell me how many guests have RSVP'd? So in total, how many have we got so far? And when does this accreditation start? Thanks.
Now we take the last one, and we'll give our leadership an opportunity to answer.
Lula Mamaja, SABC. Are you anticipating any disruptions when the president is speaking?
Wonderful. SDP and DSTPs, over to you.
Thank you very much, members of the media. I think there are quite a number of similar questions on security. The first one is whether there's extensive, right, security, and how far does it go, and so forth. In terms of our operations and our plans, we have not really changed in terms of format, right, from what we have done in the past on plans around security. But what we have indicated, also having said that, is that when you have any national event, that event, in terms of the various stakeholders that are responsible, particularly on security, they will then run their own processes of managing security in and around Parliament, right? Meaning, for instance, if you have the opening, not opening, what do you call it, the inauguration of the president, there will be a similar kind of exercise. When you have even big events or funerals or other types of rallies that do happen, we have a similar event where various parties at national, local, provincial and local government would work together in order to make sure that they have appropriate security in that regard. And then they determine the question that you're asking around the zoning and the extent thereof, because they do so on the basis of information they have, right? And that information does not emanate from us as Parliament. It would emanate from those structures based on the information they have. We, of course, as you know, we have the responsibility, meaning, to be more precise, the chairperson of the National Council of Provinces and the Speaker of the National Assembly have responsibility to manage the issues of security in terms of the powers, privileges, and immunities. So that is the extent of our responsibility, and it's given rise by that particular act. Any other thing outside of that is managed through your normal laws that are applicable in the country. But having said that, my understanding is that you have the same level of security, as it were. What we have done, Gail, as I've tried to say earlier on, is in the past we had different points, like off-searching, accreditation, because the accreditation used to happen further down there. I'm not quite sure of the names of the road further down, right? And then the search park used to be up here in the school, right? So people had to move, quite a huge distance. So we've tried to reduce that, to say you can't have people move quite a huge distance, because it also have an impact on the zoning thereof, because you then have to perhaps secure the event and the guests in that regard. So all of those things are happening in one space, right? Which, well, put it this way, in close proximity. Are we going to guarantee freedom of movement on the day for journalists? Yes, indeed, as we have said, we are ready and prepared for members of the media on the day, and we have indicated that, in fact, we have an increased number that has been shown in terms of the interest, all forms of media that will be here on the day. There will be engagements, if they have not happened, between our communications unit and yourself to say, how do we help each other in this regard? How do we deal with issues of accreditation? Where will you be based? I know that we have had discussions and arrangements with a number of media houses that are here in terms of what they will be doing on the day, and all of those have been agreed to on what should be the case. So in that regard, the preparations that needed to have been made, they are underway. They continue to be made with the various media houses who are coming to ask for accreditation. So the numbers that are there basically indicate very clearly that we're expecting quite a high number. Do we have any other additional measures of security? No. We don't have any other additional measure of security other than the measures that are there. That I can really say, as Parliament, we have asked for one, and we know that there is additional security. The question of whether are there state security operatives, there I would basically want to refer the members of the media to, firstly, what our constitution say, right? Our constitution talks about security services. So when you have events of this nature, you have, particularly for SONA, you have a number of actors in the security space, in fact, all of them. You have the South African National Defence Force, you have the South African Police, you have the Department of Justice getting involved and engaged there, you have state security. And each of those have responsibilities in terms of the law on what they do. So they form part and parcel of any planning that we do for SONA year on year, right? It's the same with the other departments, such as the presidency that gets involved, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation that gets involved, the Department of Public Works that gets involved, right? And each of them have specific responsibilities. And then we have provincial and local government that provide particular service also on the day. So indeed, state security is part of that, but for me, I would not single them out of any of these actors that are there, because they perform their own functions as provided for in terms of the law, which can be performed by other functions in this regard. To ask the question whether members of state security have been here before, after, and so forth, I think when you talk about SONA, yes, they would have been here, and they would have been here to perform the responsibilities. Is that different from any other system? Our view and our argument would be no, because that's what they normally do in this event. It's not the first time that they come. They have always been here. I mean, when you talk about those of you who would be familiar with the engagements of the government and reporting on government, you would know that they have a cluster that they call the JCPS cluster, where they form part and parcel of that. But there are other actors that are important in the planning of SONA. Now, we also want to highlight that really, from our perspective, SONA is not about security. SONA is about the day on which the president will basically be delivering the State of the Nation address. And it's about members of the public out there interacting with that process. That is key and fundamental in terms of our constitution, as you would know, which is people-orientated and people-centered. It's key and fundamental also to our idea of democracy, and it's key and fundamental when you talk about development and development issues. But we all appreciate and note that any event needs to happen in an open, transparent manner, but that is also safe and secured. So I think the issues around that, I think, should clear up the matter. The question of vetting for staff and all of that is a completely different matter. It has nothing to do with SONA. Matters of vetting for staff, as you would know, colleagues, have been matters that have been done through. But whether we are vetting staff for SONA, the simple answer is no, if I were to be more precise, right? There is no project in SONA that says, well, you have to vet staff. You have to embark on a normal process of accreditation. That normal process of accreditation basically needs to make sure that you have everyone that is here, and that is going to help to make the process work very well. So if I think those responsible for those things, they will then basically do what they need to do in this regard. So on our part, then really, colleagues and members of the media, there is no project on vetting of staff except the normal process that we have been embarking upon, which is a parliamentary project, and we have reported on that and issued a number of media statements on that. And I think our position on that matter would not have changed, right? Guaranteeing freedom of movement for journalists. I think journalists in Parliament have been guaranteed freedom of movement. And as basically a testimony to that, as you would know, members of the media, some of you are housed here in Parliament. You have, offices, equipment provided for by Parliament. You have our own access cards, so which basically means you are able to go to the places where you need to go, and that won't change, as it were, for those that are accredited on the day. They'll be able then to have access to the places where they need to. Are there places where you are not going to be able to? I don't think probably everyone will have access to where the president is, right? But in terms of doing your business, are you going to be limited more than any other usual time in terms of what will be happening in the House? The answer is no, right? Freedom of movement and freedom of basically the media doing its work, I think that is guaranteed and enshrined in our Constitution, and as Parliament, basically we are obliged to make sure that we live up to the prescripts of that. In terms of the footage, what we want to say there, I think it's a question asked by Janet, what we want to say there is you have already had experience in the last year, since the last SONA, of incidences or activities that have occurred that you may have classified them as disruptions or any similar type of issues. And I think you would have seen there that Parliament has been very open in terms of the way in which we do things. We, of course, respect the law, we respect our courts, we respect the judgment that was issued on that day. And in that, I'm saying we have already implemented those elements. So what you have seen in the past is what will be in terms of basically making sure that we have coverage of the activities there. But of course, safe to say, of course, you are members of the media and various media houses. There are particular ways in which you do your business. We are in the business of, showing the proceedings of the House. So we'll show the proceedings of the House in that regard. So I think on that score, to be clear on the answer, I don't think there will be interruption of the footage of saying there will be blackouts or anything of the sort in terms of what would happen. On our side, we are ready to provide feed and footage to yourself as we normally do for our activities. So we're expecting that the President will deliver a speech and everyone wants to connect with that, both in print and your other forms of media. How many guests have RSVP'd? Or before I skip that one, I think there's one on security outside Parliament. I hope I've answered that one, right? The security outside Parliament really would not be something that we as Parliament get heavily engaged in. The security outside Parliament would be something that those charged with the responsibility of safety and security will be responsible for. Of course, on our side, we are hoping for an event that happens very well, both inside Parliament and outside Parliament. So it's not like we don't care what happens there, but in terms of the legal responsibility, we don't have the legal responsibility to basically deal with matters of security outside of the precinct of Parliament. On how many guests, we are sitting at about 70% as the last time I checked. On the capturing of the guests, the process of accreditation begins actually, from the first, second onwards. That process of accreditation has begun between ourselves, meaning Parliament, and SSA that are helping us because they're the ones that then have the system of accreditation in that regard. So that process, basically, we are hoping to do it as very quickly as possible within this week and finish as much of it in this week. Then next week, basically, it should be capturing very small amounts of accreditation because we do have situations where people would have confirmed and maybe something happens in their space and, they decline, and then we have to deal and accommodate with those types of issues, meaning basically new people can come into the picture at that level. So we are sitting at about 70%. I've forgotten the question by Lula on expecting disruptions. Of course, you are asking, senior administrators, right, of Parliament. On our side, Lulama, we are expecting to host a successful event for our members. We are hoping to host a successful event for the president. We are hoping to host a successful event that will make South Africa proud. We are not really necessarily in the political space at that level. There will be an opportunity, as Mr. Olela would advise, for presiding officers to brief members of the media, and perhaps some of the issues can be sufficiently dealt with at that level. But from our side, we have made the necessary preparations for the event. We have looked at a number of possibilities that we can anticipate. We don't quite know what will happen. We're hoping for the best event, for a good day, and for a well-organized event that showcases South Africa. Like any other event, you do have glitches that you may experience, or you do have challenges that you may experience. We have looked at possibilities in terms of the challenges that we have experienced in the past and those that we think we can anticipate. We have made the appropriate provisions in that regard in order to make sure that the event is as successful as it can be. I don't know whether that really answers your question, but
Another round. Is there anyone with additional questions? 1, 2. Okay, start with you.
Good afternoon, Paul Vecchiotti from Bloomberg. Can you give us an idea when the road closures will start? Will they just be on the day, or will they be in the days leading up to the State of the Nation address? Secondly, policemen, apparently there are about 6,000 extra policemen being brought into Cape Town for this. Do you know any details about that? And then thirdly, the seat allocation this year for guests has been based on party proportion between parties. I believe it's like 156 seats for ANC guests, 54 something for the DA, 16 for the EFF. Can you just give us a breakdown on the number of seats allocated to each political party, please? Thank you.
Hi, Babalo from the Sunday Times. Just on the, you mentioned about 700 odd journalists on the day. Can you just tell us about members of the public? I mean, how will they be accommodated as far as the public gallery? Will that number from previous years, will it remain, or will they have less allocation because of the increase in demand? And can you just give us an idea on, I know Nahau has been holding meetings about, what they're planning to do on SONA, but that hasn't taken place yet. I think they'll meet next week or something. Have you had any discussions with them regarding their plans and whatever it is that they are, can you just give us an update? I know it might be a separate matter, just an update on the feasibility study on the relocation of Parliament. I know it was open for bids last year. I'm just checking on that process. I mean, it's Parliament after all. I mean, can you just give us an update on that feasibility study on the relocation? Thank you.
Any further questions?
Yeah, Janet again. Just on a point of clarity, or perhaps rephrasing the question I think we asked earlier, Secretary, could you assure the media in the public gallery that if there is a disturbance and there's a need to move around, that we won't be prevented from doing so by other agencies, such as state security or the presidential group? Because this is, I think, the incident that we've had in the past. So Parliament, it is Parliament's house, it is a house belonging to Parliament. So I'm just trying to get a sense, does the buck stop with Parliament in terms of that? Thank you.
That seems to be the last one for this round, or the last round. STP, over to you.
Thank you. Let me start with the last one. Around, Manelis, I think Gail has a question.
Okay, sharp.
So, Mr. Secretary, we hear you when you say that what is being planned for outside is not Parliament's, but you're obviously aware of what the arrangements are outside of Parliament. So what we're hearing is that the red zone of streets that members of the public won't be allowed into, I mean, that it's going to be much, much bigger than it has been before. That's what we're being told, and that's what we're asking you about. That Lely Street's going to be completely closed off, that in terms of the ring of protection, if you like, thrown around this house, which is meant to be for the people, is going to be huge. So I think that's what we're hearing, that there are SSA people who are wandering around in plain clothes and listening, in on employees' conversations within Parliament at the moment, presumably to make sure that there aren't any plans afoot or whatever to cause any disruption. So this has led to people saying that that there's sort of an unprecedented kind of securitization of Parliament taking place, where the parliamentary presiding officers aren't necessarily in charge of this, that state security is running the show and, making the calls, and that there's going to be this kind of virtual lockdown or whatever. So I just wanted to raise that so that you have a full picture of where it is that people are coming from in terms of asking questions around the security and particularly the freedom of movement journalists won't be able to move from one area to another because they'll have to be accompanied by a official, you see. You know, so those are the issues. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Gail, for that clarification. I mean, just to say categorically that matters of management of security within Parliament, as is expected, those are happening under the coordination of Parliament, meaning that we are working with all the parties, right, in that regard, noting that as Parliament, we don't have the requisite legal responsibilities and we don't have the requisite functional or operational capability of performing some of the functions, but they are happening within Parliament. Now, we have indicated that in the planning, we have your guest management, right, service, which will help to manage people from, which will help to move people from one area to another where they need to be. That will be done by officials of Parliament, right? It will be done by officials, that some of them that we have asked for from DIRCO and the presidents who normally form part and parcel of that team. And the officials of DIRCO and the presidency, they normally get engaged with their own kind of guests because they would know them better. DIRCO, they interact a lot with diplomats, so they will assist us to engage with diplomats in that regard. As you know, we have the Parliamentary Communications unit that helps to organize services with the media. And the officials in the parliamentary services, parliamentary communication services will be the one that are responsible for interacting and engaging with members of the media, right? So it will not be any SSA, any SAPS, any SNADF, or similar such officials that will be doing that. If anything at all, our officials will be assisted by officials from GCIS, people that I'm sure you're quite familiar with in the media, right? So you know them, you have engaged with them, and you know they also know you. So basically, each grouping will be assisted by people that they're a little bit familiar with, right? Except for those people that will be coming here to Parliament as guests and they don't know anybody at all, right? So the idea of securitization of Parliament or increased security of Parliament is false, it's not correct, and it doesn't have foundation at all. It's not forming part of our own thinking. We are looking forward to you doing your work, you know, reporting and informing the public on what is happening. So we'll facilitate that work as much as possible within our power in that regard. So is there any restriction over and above, let's say, what would have happened in the past? No, right? Meaning I've indicated there may be certain areas which would have been there in the past where you have certain type of dignitaries which are cordoned off, right? So that would be the case. Would you have any restrictions on the proceedings of the day? No. So you'll be able to cover the proceedings of the day. We want the media to cover the proceedings of the day when they begin, right? When the guests arrive, you'll be covering proceedings of the day. In fact, if I revise my statement, you'll be covering the proceedings of the day as early as you can on the 9th, right? Meaning that those that do early interviews will be able to do so. As I say, we have basically agreed with a number of media houses in this regard, those that normally set up here and have their, production and television crews here. They will be here doing the work that they need to do. We want them here. We have made arrangements for them to be here. Those of you who are involved in the print media, you will also be here. The radio stations will be here. We'll facilitate all of that. There is nothing on our side that says there's going to be any clampdown in that regard. There's no reason to for us to be doing that. So in that regard, really, colleagues, just to give you that sense, there isn't anything of the nature. I'm not quite sure where the idea would be coming from, but I can assure you it's not coming from Parliament. On our side, we're planning for a successful event. Then in terms of listening of staff, categorically, no, right? We work with our staff in this regard. Our staff, some of them will be participating in this event. They'll be performing certain duties, you know. So on that part, I don't think we're doing that. Whether that listening perhaps is related to the other question asked by Baba, let's say maybe the union, the answer again is no. Why? Because Parliament and the union, that is management and the union, they are in constant engagement, right? There is no need for them to, I think, be listening to each other's conversation because they're in constant engagement on the matter. I know that last week they've met several times to deal with the normal business, a number of issues that they're dealing with. So on our side, I don't think we have any red flag in that regard. The red zone outside of Parliament, we really are not anticipating increasing of any red zone. But as I say, colleagues, the size of the red zone and so forth is not determined by Parliament, right, at all, right? It's a process that is informed by a number of considerations by those responsible for making such a determination when there are national events, right? When there are national events, security structures will then see it and look at the situation and say this is what they advise based on the information that they have. So we are not expecting a huge security zone. But I must hasten to say, as Parliament, we're not the determinants of that because we don't deal with the outside of Parliament. We have not been reported to that there will be an extensive security zone beyond what we have, and therefore we have not reported as such. The question of SSA and freedom of movement, Janet, I think I've sort of answered that. I don't know whether there's anything remaining. You'll be free to do, you and the colleagues in the media will be free to do your work the way you normally do your work. And of course, where you experience glitches, there will be colleagues from PCS, the Parliamentary Communication Services. There'll be colleagues from GCIS who will be there to assist you with whatever issue that may be there, that may be arising. So I would encourage that the partnership that we have had throughout must continue in that regard. That has enabled you to do your work in Parliament. The question of how and its plans, Babal, the discussions we have had with NEHAO, and we have had discussions with the local branch, the region, the province, and national. None of those discussions have indicated any plans to disrupt SONA. And in that regard, I think we're quite comfortable to say, we know of no such plans that may be there. Of course, we are not members of NEHAO. I am not a member of NEHAO, so I may not be knowing the intricacies of there, but based on the discussions that we have had, which are very good discussions, might I add, with those colleagues, we have not had, any statement coming from them, either, in a veil form or indirectly or directly, that suggests that there'll be a disruption of SONA, right? So we would not really be able to comment on that, except just to indicate on our engagement with NEWA, which we think we're in a good space. We're talking, we're engaging as the union and management are supposed to, and we're dealing with all the issues that are there. And I know so because I've attended one of the meetings as Secretary to Parliament, and I think those conversations have been honest conversations. I have no reason to doubt any of the people that are there in terms of their engagement. On members of the public with the media, I think it's a valid question. The increase that is there, it's not going to be affecting any of the numbers in the gallery, right? The arrangements that we'll make with members of the media will be related to the media spaces that are there. Of course, on our side, working with yourself, we have to manage the situation of, there are different types of media, as you know. It's not everybody else that is going to be in the chamber. Other people will be performing other functions. They'll be setting up stations in and around Parliament, so we have to facilitate that. There will be, as you know, television there. There'll be radio and other forms. So it's not going to affect members of the public. So in that regard, we think we are good. The public participation element that we have had is continuing the way it should be. And then there are some there's one more that I need to answer and leave the difficult ones to my colleagues here. The one of the deployment of police, I think that was asked by Business Day. 6,000, we don't know as Parliament, we have never known as Parliament how many operatives are deployed outside of Parliament because it's not our responsibility and we don't necessarily have to know. Police do that based on their plans. So we can't confirm to you that there's been 6,000, we can't deny it. I think the most appropriate thing to deal with that issue is to ask the police themselves, who can answer much more better than we can and give more accurate information. So we don't have an issue about, we don't know anything about the numbers and our engagements don't lead to the numbers of saying, give us so many numbers for SONA and so forth. They do so based on their own information, their own plans. Then there are two areas that I want the colleagues to deal with. The road closures, Advocate Pindela will deal with that. And the category of guests, I think the Deputy Secretary can just give you a list there on the category of guests. You have asked another question on the seats. The seats are allocated proportionally, right? There are seats that are allocated, as is normally the case, to President as a guest. The President has people that he has to invite. If I'm correct, Nomkos, it's about 46, right? And then there are guests that are invited by Parliament. Parliament invites quite a number of people. Because this is an event of the public, we have a number of institutions that the Deputy Secretary will indicate. And then parties are also provided space to also invite people. But what we have to note is that the space we're talking about is not very big. It's a very small space comparatively. So for many of the categories, we have to do rotation. For instance, we don't invite all universities at the same time. So we will say 4 universities, if I'm correct, or 5 universities per year. So we rotate accordingly. When we deal with the SOEs, same story. We don't go for all SOEs in that year. We have a category that says about 5 SOEs per year. When we deal with business, it's the same thing. We don't invite all of business. We go quite a few number. In fact, I think it's about 3 or 4 businesses that we invite per sector. And we move from one sector to another. This year, we would have invited telecoms. Next year, we invite mining. The following year, we invite financial services and so forth, because we don't have enough numbers. There are certain categories that are consistent that the Deputy Secretary will indicate to you. But in terms of the numbers, we do rotation around that. I think the people here are not as fortunate as members of the media, because we always accredit, we don't rotate in that regard. But for other categories, what we do a rotation in that regard. And then there are certain categories at the national level where they are consistent. Like if you talk about federations of the union, they are consistent. You have about 3 federations that are there. If you talk about business federations also, business federations have increased over a number of years. So we have to try and invite different people at different times. Advocate, you want to deal with the road closure?
Thank you, Secretary, and good afternoon. The road closures will commence on the 7th of February, and they will be done in phases. The details shall be published in due course. Thank you.
I think Secretary has referred to various categories that are invited, but I can read it out for yourselves. We have a category of persons, prominent persons that come from various provinces. And then we have a category of institutions supporting the Constitution, NGOs, religious representatives, academics. Then we've got those who do request tickets, and that would come from some pensioners, students, small business. Then, of course, we've got the last category, that is the main category which Secretary was talking to. That includes your diplomats, guests of the president, presiding officers' guests, and former presidents. With time, that information gets actually publicized and shared with yourselves. That's about all, Secretary.
It seems we are concluding our media conference for today. SDP, any last comments before we close? Oh, okay, let's take...
I remember your question. I remember your question. Even though you're asking about the relocation.
Oh, the feasibility study.
The feasibility study, I think that is currently underway. It's not completed as yet. So as soon as we are ready to make any pronouncements in that regard, we'll do so.
Okay, at that point, thank you so much to all members of the media and senior officials that are here. SDP, Shabulel.
Thank you.